Welcome to the Criterion Chat, a podcast on the Criterion Collection and cinema. I'm Nate Myers, joined by Matt Peterson, as we discuss our wish lists for titles to be added to the Criterion Collection just in time for Christmas. As the nightmare year 2020 draws to a close, we dream tonight of movies that we'd like to see included in the Criterion Collection. Both Matt and I will select one contemporary and one classic movie that we think deserves the Criterion treatment, including our thoughts on supplements and artwork that we'd like to see for our dream releases. Join Matt and me as we kiss the miseries of 2020 goodbye with some eggnog and Christmas wishes for a better new year. Well, Matt, it's nice to be able to connect here and talk about our thoughts for some Criterion wishes like we do each year on our podcast.
Yeah.
We didn't really talk it through before we started recording about how we wanted to start here tonight. Do you have a preference? Do we want to start with our classic picks or with our contemporary picks? What would you prefer?
We can go classic first.
All right, awesome. So now I'm going to throw it right back at you. Do you want to go first or do you want me to go first?
Take it away. Go ahead.
All right, so I took a lot of time on this one. I had a little, I had an initial thought of the movie I wanted, and I thought, I shouldn't go with that. It's too obvious because it came to right away. So I kind of dug through a whole bunch of different movies and thinking of different ideas and thoughts of which one to pick. But then I eventually settled back in on this one and thought, that's probably the right one. So I'm going with, which is probably a little bit of a surprise pick. I'm going with the short film Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge from 1961, directed by Robert Enrico and adapted from a story by Ambrose Bierce. Ambrose Bierce was an American writer who wrote a lot about the Civil War. And Robert Enrico was a French filmmaker, and he made this movie as well as many other films. And this one became pretty popular in the early 60s. It was actually featured on The Twilight Zone. They took it and they slightly edited it, and they added an introduction and put it as a part of The Twilight Zone. And so I think it got very famous with American audiences because of that. It did win the Academy Award for Best Short Feature Film, Best Short Film Live Action back in 1962. But this is a film that I saw it first time way back when I was in college, and it really impressed me. The premise is quite simple. A man, as we learn, is going to be hung by the Union forces for interfering on a bridge, and he is set up. They're going through all the motions of getting him ready to be hung from the bridge. And then as he is hung, the rope snaps. He falls into the water of the Owl Creek, and then he starts swimming away, and it's a chase, basically, him running, trying to get back home to his plantation and to his wife. And so the film, it's about 23 minutes long, follows him through that journey, right, getting back there, and then has a very surprise ending that is famous for. I won't say what that is here. But it's a film that I think is really quite successful in terms of just showing how a short film can work. It had a big impact in terms of just making some headway of making people aware about short films back in a time when I think short films were really unknown to almost any audiences. And so this fact that it kind of was maybe a watershed for short film filmmaking, I think is another reason why it'd be a great pick. But it's also just a really well-edited film. It's got great cinematography, some kind of surrealistic sound design. There's almost no dialogue in it. There's some different sort of almost inaudible speaking that we hear from different people in the background as the main character is going to be hung. But otherwise, we really don't know much, and we just kind of follow this visceral experience. So I think it's a pretty awesome depiction of short film, and short films are kind of, I think, underrepresented in the Criterion Collection. They have gotten a little bit more popular as of late, But overall, I don't think that they get as much appreciation from anybody that they should, because they're an important part of filmmaking. And so I think that's why it would be a great one to have as part of the Criterion Collection. So I'll kick it over to you, Matt. Do you have any thoughts? Have you seen this movie? I can't remember if you've seen it or not.
I think I've heard of it. I have not seen it. Yeah, it's an interesting pick. I think, short films are definitely an underappreciated art form, I think. And it's always kind of that category in the Academy Awards that is rushed through during the telecast, and you see these little clips of these films, and you want to see them, you want to check them out. They're hard to get a hold of sometimes. I guess with online venues nowadays, it's easier to dig up some of these films. But yeah, Criterion, well, they just released that disc with Scorsese's shorts, so it seems like they're giving more attention to short films, especially on the Criterion channel. I noticed there's a lot of shorts there. Is there any chance this is on the Criterion channel already? Have you looked there?
I haven't looked there. I haven't found. You can get it online, the full original unedited version, and you can also, if you were to get if you're gonna buy a season of the Twilight Zone, I think it's season 5 features this as well. So it might be some rights issues that the Criterion Collection doesn't have it for streaming purposes. But I have to go take a look and see if it is there or not. But I do think, one of the things people often do when they do ever talk about short films, and this is kind of, you mentioned the Scorsese set, I think there's a David Lynch set as well. They often go oh yeah, that's stuff that directors did back when they were in film school before they could make feature films. And we almost see it as a springboard to other work as opposed to appreciating it in its own right. And I think that's what's kind of neat about, maybe doing this film, is because it isn't about a director that people really know or anything else. It's just a film itself that I think really captures the beauty of this and how succinct it is and how much it's a visual storytelling method is, I think, really kind of a cool thing that this movie does, especially taking no dialogue.
So it was officially part of a Twilight Zone episode, you said?
Yeah. They added the whole. They reformatted it slightly because they had to create commercial breaks, so they added those in. They shortened it up so it could fit within the actual 30-minute slot with commercials, and I think they added both a beginning and an ending with Rod Serling's voiceover narration for it, just as they would for any Twilight Zone episode. So some of the real big fans of this movie like to kind of talk about that as being this terrible butchering of the original film. I don't know that I've ever actually seen the full Twilight Zone episode. I've seen little bits of the beginning where it has Rod Serling's voiceover, but I don't know if I've actually watched it with the edits in it. But that being said, I think it's just kind of neat that the Twilight Zone somebody working there must have seen it, really liked it, and said, well, let's try to get an arrangement so we can get this out for audiences to see. Definitely does not fit your usual Twilight Zone kind of movie or episode, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, it sounds like it would be an outlier. I want to say I've heard of the film unrelated to the Twilight Zone, and it's an interesting pick. I think I could see Criterion being interested in something like this.
Yeah, I think it would fit in well, and like I said, it's a way of just trying to feature short films, and this is, I think, a particular short film that would resonate with a lot of people. Again, partly because it is so visceral, and it is just, it's just really kind of a neat. There's actually some neat editing and camera work that they do here. They have some handheld camera work in it. They have some tracking shots that are very neat, using trucks clearly to kind of run along with the character. So it's just really well done, and I think pretty innovative just in some of the camera work. It was, considering that it was made in 1961 as well. So I really think it works on a whole different levels. As far as some supplements, so the director, Enrico, I think, I don't know any of his other films I haven't seen, but he did a sort of a trilogy of Civil War short films. So I thought this one's obviously the one that everybody knows about. You could maybe supplement it with the other 2 short films he did in the Civil War era that were both also based on Bierce's novels or short stories. One is called Chickamauga, about the Battle of Chickamauga, where the Confederates had pushed back and defeated Union forces. And the other one is L'Oiseau Moqueur, which is The Mockingbird. And I don't know the specifics of what that film is about, but I just know that he had made both of those films in 1962 after this had been such a success. He got financing to do these additional two short films on the Civil War. So I thought it'd be kind of neat to round it out by seeing the whole thing. And I thought it'd be good to have maybe from some film scholars just talk about the art of short films. Because I think, like I said, it's not something people always appreciate or understand what it has to contribute to cinema. And I think it'd be neat to get the perspectives of some film scholars about why it's important. So that'd be my thought for a supplement. And then for a cover, just a sepia tone image of the noose hanging down below the bridge, having the little bit of the bridge and having the noose hanging down from it in a sepia tone, and just kind of this washed out sort of aesthetic would be a perfect sort of representation of this film. So that'd be kind of my take as the dream release for a classic film to be added to the Criterion Collection.
Yeah, nice pick. I think it would definitely have to be fleshed out a bit more in terms of supplements to probably justify a release of a short film. But of course, Criterion has done that before with Night and Fog, and I think they've done some Chris Marker films kind of as a compilation as well. So yeah, I think that sounds like an interesting addition.
Well, we'll see. Maybe someone's listening and will take me up on it here. So
yeah.
Well, what was your take, Matt? What were you interested in for a classic pick?
Yeah, so my pick is probably something pretty obscure to American audiences, but to Russian audiences, it's a film that's extremely well known. It's a film called The Irony of Fate, and the full title is The Irony of Fate, or Enjoy Your Bath. And the actual literal the literal Russian translation is The Irony of Fate, or With a Light Steam. Now, this is a 1976 romantic comedy. It's actually a television film that was directed by, I'm going to butcher a lot of these names probably, but Eldar Ryazanov, and based on a screenplay written by Emil Brzezinski. And this is a really delightful comedic film that was extremely popular immediately upon its release, and it's become a staple every year in Russia for New Year's Eve. So New Year's Eve is by far the biggest holiday in Russia. It's a huge deal. It's bigger than Christmas, which is understandable because, of course, during the Soviet Union, secular holidays were really promoted more than religious holidays. So New Year's Eve really became the big bash every year. And this film, the story of this film takes place during New Year's Eve. So it's kind of like Russia's It's a Wonderful Life or The Ten Commandments, just something that plays on TV every year. And it's a very long film. It's about 3 hours long. And it's something just that people have on in the background when they're making food and preparing for the New Year's Eve celebration. So this has kind of become a tradition in our own house to have this film kind of going as we're either getting ready for New Year's Eve, or I actually like to pay attention to it and watch it because I enjoy it quite a bit. And I'll kind of go into the story. I guess I'm probably giving a little too much background to start, but it tells the story of Zhenya, who is a young doctor, played by Andrei Myagkov, and he is at a bathhouse or like a sauna with a bunch of his friends, and they're getting drunk, celebrating the upcoming marriage of one of their friends. And one of their friends has to catch a plane to Leningrad. They're in Moscow originally, and they're all drunk. They go to the airport to see their friend off, and they're so drunk they can't remember which one of their friends is going to Leningrad. So Zhenya ends up going to Leningrad mistakenly, and he stumbles into an apartment building thinking that it's his own apartment, and meets a woman named Nadia who lives in this apartment that looks exactly like Zhenya's apartment in Moscow. So there's a real sort of commentary throughout this film about the pitfalls of at least Soviet architecture and how everything looks the same, even between Soviet cities. And the film actually opens up with a very humorous cartoon that plays off of that idea as well. So the film almost seems critical of the communist system in some ways, but it's kind of irreverent, and it's not meant to be a harsh criticism, more of a comedic criticism, and that tone kind of goes throughout the film and works quite well. So it's really a comedy of errors, and it's very much a situational comedy. And these two characters, Nadia and Zhenya, come to know each other through this chance meeting. And I won't spoil what happens, but you can probably kind of figure out where the trajectory of this film is going. And it's just really a delightful film that hasn't really had a proper release in the U.S. You can find a Region 1 DVD, and the quality is pretty good, but it's not great. So, Criterion has released other television projects from European directors like Fassbender. So I think this is something that would really fall under the umbrella of an important film. Is it a great example of cinema? Certainly not. It's not particularly well made from a cinematic standpoint, but the acting is very, very strong. The script is great. And again, I think it falls under that umbrella of important films. So it'd be really great if Criterion could, work with Mosfilm or a Russian studio to find the original film elements and really restore this. It would be something really special. So I don't know if you ever heard of this film, Nate. It's one that I hadn't heard of until a few years ago. My wife introduced it to me, actually. And it's become kind of a staple in our house.
I have not heard of it, so it does sound like an interesting movie. And I think you mentioned just, is it a great film? And I think it's important to recognize great and important are not synonymous, right? You can have a film that's good and important in the sense that it's shaped a certain kind of genre, or it's shaped a certain kind of culture, and it's made a sort of inroads into just sort of a particular country's cinematic understanding without itself having been an objectively great film. And so I don't think that's a reason to count any particular movie out of the Criterion Collection. It's obviously always nice if a great film and an important film goes in hand, but it sounds like if this has that kind of major appeal, like It's a Wonderful Life in America, you could say, yeah, this clearly is an important film. And so I think, it's kind of a neat pick. I think it'd be one that also is just great because one of the nice things about the collection is that it does introduce people to films they otherwise would not know. Yeah. And this would definitely be one I think most audiences wouldn't recognize as well.
Yeah, it's a film. First time I watched it, I wasn't really blown away by it. I enjoyed the situational comedy. I enjoyed the performances. But like other Russian films I've seen, sometimes the craft isn't quite up to the level that I would want to see. But ultimately, it's forgivable. And it really kind of wins you over with its charm eventually. But it really hinges on those two main performances. So I mentioned Andrei Myagkov, and then Barbara Brilska plays Nadia. And they have a great interplay with each other. They have a great chemistry ultimately. And the supporting characters are very good as well. But it was originally shown as a two-part telefilm over 2 nights. So that explains the long runtime. And there are sections of the film where people sing songs. And it's not like a musical, but, someone will pick up a guitar and sing like a traditional Russian folk song. And so that kind of pads out the runtime to a degree as well. But the songs have become a favorite aspect of this film for a lot of people in Russia. So it's just an important part of the film, even though the narrative may really stop at that point. So it's just kind of an interesting film. It's kind of a curiosity in some ways, but I think it's something that deserves better notoriety, I think, in America. In terms of supplements, yeah, hard to say, I guess. A retrospective documentary on its impact in Russia, I think, is an obvious idea for some supplemental material. There was a sequel of sorts made a few years ago that is not great, but it does feature some of the original cast. You know, having that on there as kind of a supplement might be interesting, but not vital by any means. I guess I wouldn't go overboard with the supplements. Something that speaks to the import of this film to the Russian people and Russian culture is probably the best way to go with those extras. In terms of cover art, I'm, as you know, a big fan of original poster cover art, and the original poster for this film is actually very neat looking. It's kind of the stylized piece of artwork. You can see it on the Wikipedia, and it has sort of a silhouette or a profile of the two main characters, and it has the very plain, nondescript apartment buildings in the background. So again, calling back to that joke aspect or even critical aspect of Soviet society that's contained in the film. So it would be special if Criterion picked this up and released it.
That's a nice pick. I think that'd be great. Just, I mean, again, it's something that sounds like it'd be really important in terms of just appreciating a certain aspect of Russian cinema. But also, I think Criterion, they have comedies, but I think, oftentimes they sort of default to more serious artwork, right, and serious films. So to bring more comedies into the collection is always a good thing as well. And Russian comedy, I can't say I get the sense that that's really well represented anywhere outside of Russia. So to have just a Russian comedic film would also be a good thing to have in the collection too.
Yeah, and I don't want to make it sound like I think all Russian films are poorly made or something based on what I said earlier. There's a lot of great Russian films, obviously, but I do find that it takes me a while to warm up to some Russian films stylistically. Tarkovsky comes to mind. I mean, the first time I saw Solaris, I was very put off by the style of the filmmaking because it was just so different. And that kind of holds true here to a degree. But again, this film is very much about the writing, about the performances, about the situations, and less about the filmmaking. And it very much has a television feel to it. But it would be great if those film elements could be discovered, if they exist, and restored. I think of Criterion's release of the Decalogue, Kieslowski, and some of the really great work they've done on television projects. And yeah, if that was applied to this, that would be great.
And I think it just also the fact that, like you said, you mentioned Decalogue, you mentioned that they had done stuff with Wim Wenders and Fassbinder, right? These people have done television work and have brought it into the collection, right? I mean, it's cinema. I think, the feature film is one part of it. The short film, obviously, as I was mentioning in my pick, is part of it. I think serial films are a part of it, too. And the collection is, I think, trying to also represent and acknowledge that. So I think that's a good thing on that level, too. From a contemporary pick, I also have gone with the route of a comedy. This is a film that, according to the Motion Picture Association of America, was rated PG-13 for sexual content, language, and some teen partying. And so, Matt, please do not hate me, but I am going to recommend and propose Mean Girls from 2004 as my contemporary pick in the Criterion Collection.
Holy smokes.
So have you seen Mean Girls, Matt? I don't know if you've seen it.
I don't think I've ever seen the whole thing. I've seen bits and pieces. I just remember Rachel McAdams is in it. It's like one of her early roles, right?
Yep, she plays the meanest of the girls.
Okay, yeah. I've heard it's
I'm
good.
surprised
I haven't seen it yet.
You're the one person I think that goes, Mean Girls, isn't Rachel McAdams in it? And you don't notice or pay attention to the fact that Lindsay Lohan is the main star.
Oh, I think I've just blocked her out of my memory at this point.
It's the one movie of hers that people like. Well, I was looking through films made in the 21st century. Just kind of, I pulled up my IMDb list of kind of films that I've given a rating to. And, a couple of them came to mind for it. And this one was the one I ultimately settled in on. Partly because, again, getting at that idea of important film, the kind of teen comedy is a genre. It's a genre that's been around for a long time. Teenage genre kind of things going all the way back to the 50s with, say, Rebel Without a Cause. And then obviously starting in the 80s with John Hughes, you had much more of that comedic and that sort of dramedy thing kind of take place. And so I think each generation has a kind of a comedy that comes about that sort of depicts the teen life and high school and social situations. And so this film definitely, I think, captures that, and it's a good movie. It's not a great movie. It's a little bit more visually interesting and sometimes even daring. There's a few sequences in it that are actually kind of abstract and just downright odd that sort of, initial viewing, you might think, boy, that doesn't quite work. And then you kind of go, but damn, I'm glad they had some guts and did something weird, a couple of times. I'm thinking of a scene where the main character is Katie, played by Lindsay Lohan, who is just transferred into high school after being raised by her parents in Africa, and comes out of a homeschooling background, and so she kind of visualizes what would happen in the animal kingdom. Her parents are both zoologists, and they visualize it as if all the students are acting like wild animals out in the bush. And so it's kind of got some weird little things like that they do. And I think what's unique about this is that it's still almost, it's over 15 years old. It's still very quoted. It has a cultural impact. And I happen to, through my work, be in contact with teens pretty regularly. And this is a movie that they all go to and they watch, much like perhaps our generation, Matt, might have gone back to the Breakfast Club. And so I think, which, by the way, also is in the collection. So I think for that reason, it is important and has kind of something to say about this genre. And it is very well acted. It's got a nice message to it. It's not overly preachy or overly sentimental. It's just got some solid performances, a good script. Tina Fey wrote the script. She adapted it from a self-help book and then created a fictional story around the premises of this. And she has a supporting part in it. And a very good cast, lots of clever and funny dialogue and interesting setups. And I watched it again just a couple days ago in anticipation of our podcast. And it just was kind of fun to see a film made and set in high school prior to smartphones. That's another thing about this film, is it's definitely a time capsule of a certain era of young life in America in the first part of the 21st century. And it's got some good pointed thoughts here and there, some sharp jokes. So I definitely know it's an unconventional pick, but it's my pick anyway.
Yeah, I was not expecting that one. But I've heard good things about it. Yeah, you mentioned Tina Fey writing it. I think that was one of the projects that brought her quite a bit of notoriety. And it's a film that comes up fairly frequently. I think just people talking about comedies that are important in the past couple of decades. And so I think it would probably fit into the collection. I mean, they do have a relationship with Paramount. They put out Election recently, which is probably similar in tone in some ways, but
Election's a little darker, but it is in terms of just kind of that playing around a little bit with some of the teenage tropes. It does have that in common with it.
Yeah. So I don't think it would be out of character for Criterion to consider this title.
damn it, if you can have Michael Bay in there, you can have Lindsay Lohan too, you know?
She gets a bad rap, I think. I mean, clearly, her personal life has overshadowed her professional one, but I remember her giving some pretty good performances earlier in her career, and yeah,
it's the classic example of someone. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I guess I'll have to dig up this film and actually watch it.
Yeah, I would recommend it. I think you'll actually find it kind of funny and having some good wit about it. And I think Lindsay Lohan actually is. I mean, I haven't seen her if she's in any movies recently, but at that time, I think she had some real talent. And sadly, like happens with a lot of people, the success overwhelms a person at such a young age, and then they make personal decisions that have career consequences and public relations consequences, and the thing can get off the rails pretty fast. Yeah. But if you look at her in this film, she's a very likable presence. She's a very relatable presence, and she does a nice job in terms of creating a character that's believable, and she fleshes out a whole character arc. She fleshes out various dynamics within it. So it's actually a much more impressive performance from a young performer that I think you see typically. And the others are very good in it too. Lacey Chabert is in it. She's very funny. Obviously, Rachel McAdams went on to great things after this as well. She's very funny in it. And then you have just good adults filling in things as well. Obviously Tina Fey, but Tim Meadows is in this. He's very funny as the principal. So it's just a well acted film, and it's well directed. Mark Waters did the directing, and he finds the right tone to make it very much a comedy, and it's very well glamorous in a certain sense, but there are some neat visual touches. There are some editing things he does that don't get in the way, that don't distract, but make it actually pretty good. So I definitely think that it's more interesting than your typical comedy film. It's got more thought and more ideas behind it, and it does have a woman's voice. Even though directed by a man, it is written by a woman, and I think it has certain insights to it that men would not come up with, that you don't find in something like a John Hughes. So I think those are all worthwhile things. As far as supplements, I have a couple thoughts. You could port over the material that's on the Mean Girls release from Paramount. So you could there's a commentary by the director, by Tina Fey, and also Lorne Michaels was a producer. Obviously, Tina Fey came to prominence through Saturday Night Live before she went into other things, and so he was one of the producers on this. But there's also like a blooper reel. There's deleted scenes, so you can bring those over. But I think it'd be neat also to do a sort of documentary about just the teen genre, about the high school comedy genre, and have a couple different people who've been affiliated with it, some of the actors that have been affiliated with it, be a part of this, and how they've seen it evolve and how it's spoken to different generations. I think would be kind of a neat little feature. I also would like to see them actually have a feature on Lindsay Lohan, have an interview with her, and talk about how this role, how she approached it, what it meant to her, and then just even kind of, I think she could probably relate to this character now, I think, differently than she did even back then, just with kind of her experience in Hollywood, right, and how things worked out and the cliques and the things that emerge in show business and the parallel there, and to explore that in an interview, I think would be neat. And then one of the features in the film, one of the elements of it, they have what's called the burn book, where the girls write mean things about people. And I thought it would be a really kind of fun, neat thing if you get the cast and crew in on it, is if in the insert you actually made that into a burn book where they wrote mean things about each other in a joking way. I thought that would be kind of a neat little supplement that you could add into a physical release. Again, proving why physical media, not just streaming media, is important. And then as for the title, as for the cover, what I thought would be kind of neat, there's an image, again, it's one of those more surreal images in the film where Lindsay Lohan playing Katie falls into a garbage can and you just see her feet sticking out of it. So I thought, take that, isolate that, and put that on the cover, and then have just all this pink and glitter around it. I thought that would be a kind of a nice perfect visual cover for this in the Criterion Collection. So that is my pick for a contemporary release.
Yeah, that's interesting. I can see Criterion doing that. You know, they seem to come up with
It would
some...
sell too. That'd be the thing. It would actually get some money for them too, fill the coffers.
Yeah. It's I think of Ghost World and a lot of the other sort of teen-oriented or youth-oriented comedies that have made it into the Criterion Collection. So there's definitely some precedent there, and yeah. One thing to note too, when we do these episodes, I think you and I both are pretty conscious of picking titles we think would potentially actually get into the collection, and some of the ones we mentioned in the past have made it into the collection, or not that we had anything to do with that, of course, but or have shown up on the Criterion channel. Or did we? Yeah, we will never know, will we? We will never know.
Yeah, you can't disprove it.
That's right. So I think this is something that, you know, on first glance would seem like a surprising choice, but it sounds like it would be a good fit.
Well, Matt, what did you come up with for your contemporary pick?
Yeah, so my contemporary film is quite timely, actually. And loosely related to my previous film in terms of its 1970s setting. But I picked this before the recent passing of John le Carré. So my film pick is from 2011, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. So this is a fairly recent adaptation of the novel directed by Thomas Alfredson. And the screenplay is written by Bridget O'Connor and Peter Strawn, of course, based on John le Carré's 1974 novel. And the film stars Gary Oldman as George Smiley, who is a member of the British Secret Service or British Intelligence Service, the segment of which here is called the Circus. And he is really kind of the next in command under John Hurt's character of Control. And I'm hesitant to get too far into the plot of this film, and a lot of people may be familiar with it, but it's just a wonderfully intricate story on the hunt for a mole within the British Intelligence Service, and it just has an all-star cast, some of the best British actors. You have Colin Firth, Tom Hardy, I mentioned John Hurt, Toby Jones, Benedict Cumberbatch, Mark Strong, Syrian Hinds. Just an amazing cast here. And the film is beautifully assembled. The script is wonderfully twisty, really in all the right ways. Of course, it has good source material to be based on. But, you know, this is another film that, similar to Irony of Fate, my first viewing, I didn't love it. I could admire the craft, Gary Oldman's performance in particular, and the subtlety of his performance is really extraordinary. But it's a film that just sticks with you and really kind of haunted me in many ways. And I've gone back to it many times since, and it's really become one of my favorite films of the 2010s. I think it's pretty much a classic at this point in my eyes. I'm a big fan of Cold War films in general and just the subject of the Cold War. And this film just strikes me as... Of course, I wasn't alive to experience these events myself, but it just strikes me as a film that's probably fairly accurate in terms of how this war was really fought, right? It's a war that was fought in the shadows, a war that was fought through subtext and subterfuge and events that went unreported, right? Or events that... will forever be a mystery to us, you know. So this film really captures that tone beautifully, and the cinematography in particular, Hoyte van Hoytema is the DP here, works with Christopher Nolan currently, also shot Spectre with Sam Mendes. His style, which is kind of this almost burnt tobacco, quasi Gordon Willis sort of look, is just very, very effective here. And I just love the look of this film. The production design in this film is outstanding as well. It's amazing. And I know you're a fan of this film too, Nate, and I even think that you were onto the greatness of this film before I was. So I'll just kick it over to you. Any thoughts on Tinker Tailor?
Oh, yeah, no, I love it. So totally, hands down, I'd say yes. I think this is a great film and would be awesome in the collection. Great performances. The acting is out of this world. Gary Oldman's best performance, maybe. I mean, it really is just incredible from him as an actor, and he's got so many good works. I think what I remember most about this film is, like you said, that sense of it being realistic. Obviously, I wasn't alive in the Cold War. I wasn't a spy, but the fact that it is very cerebral and the decisions and the life and death situations aren't this contrived, there's a ticking bomb sort of thing. It's much subtler than that, but the stakes are nonetheless much more real. I'm thinking of the scene in the film where you just have a guy pull a gun, and then you don't really ever see the actual confrontation. You cut back later on to what has happened. But you just think, I mean, there isn't like big chases. It's not Jason Bourne smashing through windows and things like that. It's middle-aged men just paying attention, picking up on details, trading secrets, trying not to get caught in a bad spot, right? And I thought the film just kind of has grown on me as well. I loved it right away, but it's grown on me over the years as well, so it definitely is a great pick. And it would be in keeping with some of the other work they've done. They obviously, the collection already has from Le Carré's own history. The Spy Who Came In From the Cold is in the collection already. And also, there's just a side note. There's a great BBC miniseries starring Alec Guinness that adapted this back in the 70s that I really like too. So if anybody wants to see that, that's very good. And it's interesting, especially because how Guinness plays the part versus how Oldman plays the part of George Smiley is just cool to compare. They both are clearly coming from the same source material, but they bring a certain attitude, a certain disposition that's different, right? But still, obviously, interpreting the same material. And it's just kind of neat to be able to compare these two great actors tackling a character in a different way. So I would definitely recommend that this be a part of the collection too, for sure.
Yeah, and I usually try to pick films that either haven't been released on Blu-ray or don't really have a great release on Blu-ray. It doesn't mean I won't pick a film that already has a good release, but I try to think of something that would benefit from the Criterion treatment. I definitely think this film falls into that camp. I actually think the existing transfer on Blu-ray isn't that great, and I don't know if that reflects the original presentation of the film, but the transfer always seemed very noisy to me, and it wasn't like a natural grain sort of noise. It almost seemed like video noise to a degree. I don't know. Again, I'm not sure if that's baked into the original look of the film or not, but if they were able to do a better restoration or a better transfer, I think that would be helpful because the visuals in this film are so strong. And in terms of supplements, with the passing of Le Carré, I mean, it would be natural to have a piece on his career and his contribution to cinema with all the adaptations that have been made over the years from his work. I think that would be really great to have a retrospective piece on that. And a piece on the Cold War itself would be a natural choice too. And any real-life stories that are comparable to what we're seeing here would be interesting to explore. But I would really love to see some in-depth features on the making of this film, especially the production design and the cinematography, because, again, I just think it has some of the best production design I've ever seen, and the level of detail is pretty amazing. So a look into that would be definitely welcome. And in terms of cover art, I think something based around a chessboard would be appropriate. So I always think of the image of John Hurt pasting or taping those pictures of the different members of the circus onto those chess pieces, right? And George Smiley takes those later in the film too and uses those. So that would be a neat image. But the backdrop of the cover would have to be that sort of burnt orange soundproofing material that's inside the circus little chamber where they meet. I just love the look of that, especially how it's photographed throughout this film. It always drops into kind of the soft focus behind the characters, and it creates this very surreal sort of environment when they're having these discussions. I think that would be the color scheme I would go for in terms of the background of the cover. So there's some artistic way to integrate those elements. I think that would make for a neat package. So I hope,
awesome.
I hope Criterion takes advantage of any relationships they have to bring this to market, because I think it deserves a real special edition treatment.
As I was listening to your ideas for supplements, I thought you could add another one just focusing on the adaptation process of the writing of the script.
Yeah.
Famously, this film waits a good long period of time before George Smiley says a single word of dialogue, right? You see him, he doesn't say anything, but I think in the original script that didn't it wasn't written that way. Just they wound up kind of shaping it and molding it that way in the editing and in the directing. But it just the book itself is a very complex book. And lots of jargon, and they do keep the jargon in, but they make it accessible, but without being too insulting or condescending to the audience. And so I just think that that'd be a neat thing to focus in on the screenplay, because it's a great screenplay, and I think sometimes we don't always pay attention to just how good and important the screenwriting process is to making everything else be a success along with it. Well, those are, I think, some good picks. Of course, 2020 has not been much of a year for movies. We're still kind of working our way through the COVID-19 pandemic here, but hopefully 2021 will have a lot more for us to work with and to talk about on that front. But we'll see what the new year brings, huh?
Yeah, let's hope it's a better one.
Yeah, for sure. Be nice to be able to go start seeing movies in theaters again. New movies, not just some old movie that gets released. So, all right. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. We will be discussing Martin Scorsese's The Irishman in our next podcast, which will be premiering in January. Thank you, and keep collecting. Both Matt and I will select one contemporary and one classic movie that we think deserves their Criterion cheat. Yeah. All right, I'll try this again. This shouldn't be that hard.
I'm just breaking up your flow here with all my shenanigans over here.